Debt. It's a word that for some of us disturbs us to the core, while for most people in modern society, it's embraced as the quickest way to the good life. But why such a vast difference of opinion? I mean, the words disturb and embrace, they're polar opposites. So who's right and who's wrong? Today, I want to deep dive into what consumer debt really is, what it's not, and how it can massively affect your future well-being and happiness. After watching today's video, you'll more fully understand why some folks avoid debt like the plague, while others grab as much of it as they can. Okay, simply put, debt is money that you've borrowed from others to sustain your current lifestyle. Debt in theory is just something you acquire now with other people's money, and you must pay back in the future with a little bit of interest. This means whatever you borrow, you're paying back the original amount plus a bit more. And like most things in life, small doses of debt are harmless. To me, it's like consuming a little bit of drugs or alcohol. If the amount consumed is small, it's a low-risk experience. But the problem is, for many, a little bit of safe amounts of debt snowballs into more and more, which is used primarily to upgrade your lifestyle fast, is a lot like drugs. They both create an immediate and massive boost of dopamine straight to the brain, which easily becomes an addiction, especially anyone who has self-control issues. And once its hooks are in, it can easily balloon into big and dangerous financial problems. Debt abuse can quickly turn a successful life into an absolute nightmare. Because the truth is, adding debt to your life makes you more financially fragile. Or, to say it another way, debt makes you less resilient to life's inevitable uncertainties. And when you're saddled with lots of debt, you lose one of the most important things in your life, true happiness, your freedom. So, why does anyone fall into the debt trap? Like most things, it's a combination of things, but one major contributor as humans, we're masters at justifying our decision, wants, and desires. If we want something bad enough, we can create just about any elaborate justification out of thin air. For example, if you choose to acquire a massive amount of education expense, it's okay, because it's always wise to invest in yourself, right? Extravagant home loans? No worries. Home prices always go up. Easy credit card debt? Hey now, you don't want to miss out on the free airline miles. Fancy auto loans? Well, you work hard, so you deserve it. See what I mean? Debt is so easy to justify. But just because you can justify it, should you? Is debt helpful to your life's bigger goals and aspirations? Today, most people think the answer to that is yes. Otherwise, the average U.S. household wouldn't be carrying $155,000 worth of debt. But before you decide, let's walk through each type of debt, discuss their justifications, and the effect this debt has on your overall resiliency and your future happiness. Now, before we go on, if you like this sort of content, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really helps us out. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that as well. That way, you'll never miss a future video about how to become a more resilient person. Okay, student loan debt. Here are a few student loan stats to think about. Student loan debt is a $1.6 trillion problem. The average student loan debt balance is $37,000. Among today's college students, 65% graduate with student loans. The student loan debt growth rate outpaces the rise in tuition costs by 353%. 54% of master degree holders owe an average of $70,000 in federal student loans, and 45% of doctoral degree recipients own an average of $118,000. But with this amount of debt coming out of college, it quickly becomes a lifelong burden for millions of people. But debt, like formal education, should be a temporary condition. You see, most of our lives should be lived debt-free, just as large parts of our life won't be spent in high school or in college. We go to grade school for years, living off the backs of our parents, and the idea is we're gaining skills and knowledge and capabilities that'll allow us to live and thrive on our own someday. We then decide it's time to further our education with college, but college is expensive. The good news for some students, though, is that mom and dad, they'll pony up cash for school out of love. And then the debt vanishes like magic. But I ask, is that the best way for a student to learn about financial responsibilities and the perils of debt? And then on the other hand, parents who expect repayment might be doing their child a greater favor. Maybe they're teaching their child the value of money and the perils of debt, but for most parents, they can't afford to pay for college. So for most aspiring students to get to the career promised land, most of them have to take on some amount of student loans. And this debt is almost always justified as an investment. And it is, if you don't take on too much. But I've come across many students who've graduated with hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt. It's a very big hole to begin any career. Sure, for a doctor or a lawyer, these debts can be somewhat justified. But sorry, this amount of debt is not justified for liberal arts or history majors. The decision to take on massive student loan debt against a low-wage career is downright irresponsible, and it's costing you your future happiness. These students will be paying off that student loan debt for decades to come, giving away major chunks of their salaries every single month, hindering their ability to accumulate real wealth. Yet, we hear these sad student loan debt stories all the time. It's like all math goes out the window when we're talking about student loans, and all education debt is good debt. But the math is easy. All you got to do is take the average salary of your chosen career path, and then compare that to the future salary of 20-year student loan amortization on the amount of debt it takes to acquire such a career. Now, what's the percentage of your salary you must chunk off to pay your student loans? Obviously, the lower it is, the better, but I suggest you do everything in your power to keep that percentage of your salary at or below 10% on a 20-year payback period. Again, these numbers change based on career salaries and interest rates and you actually completing the degree. Because if you don't finish the degree, then your average annual salary number will likely be much less than the number you're using to justify the debt. I highly recommend you find and look for a good free online calculator to enter your own information. But with the cost of college skyrocketing, it can be extremely difficult to get a 4-year education with a reasonable amount of student loan debt. That's why you must map out your future if you want to avoid entering a debt trap before you even begin your career. For example, things get unsustainable when your future career is only about $40,000 annually, but you exit school with a 6-figure student loan debt. And unfortunately, these situations aren't rare. Heck, it's gotten so bad there's a big political push to just forgive these debts. Now, I try to avoid politics in my posts and my videos, but I gotta be honest here, I really struggle with the calls for the government to just write off all student loan debt for past students and future students and just creating free post-secondary education. Because free is never free. The bill just gets transferred to taxpayers. Perhaps society can justify this extra cost to taxpayers, but due to the law of commons, what's to prevent students from abusing this gift and the entire system becoming one big inefficient party? Because that's what happens when you remove and reduce accountability. And not only that, but there are also moral hazards with this type of burden shift. What does such a move teach students about financial responsibility for their future? I promise you, it won't teach that generation or future generations how to live within their means. And eventually, if you don't pay back your debts, you become more and more fragile and more a slave to the lender. This is true for both individuals as well as nation states. Okay, let's discuss the next easily justified debt: mortgages and vehicle debt. As soon as a young adult graduates from school, they feel the need to immediately show their friends and their family that they've made it. This often means a big luxurious house and a fancy car, but most of us cannot pay for our homes up front. Few young couples have $300,000 or $400,000 lying around, burning a hole in their pocket just after college. The same goes for acquiring a new car, though this one is often more associated with debt abuse. Young people taking on debt of a house or a car should first ask themselves what an appropriate debt is. Like, for example, do I really need this $45,000 car or this $400,000 home? Should I buy something cheaper until later in life when I can afford such luxuries? Should I just rent an apartment for now? Unfortunately, many discover too late the $750 a month car payment and the $200 a month insurance payment and the $150 a month gasoline bill for that sports car or SUV that suck up their livelihood. Only to couple this fancy vehicle debt with a $2,000+ a month house payment, a few hundred in utilities, a few thousand in groceries and restaurant costs, their student loan payments, credit card payments, and of course, inevitable taxes. Not only are you carrying a massive debt, but the repayment on the debt portion must also begin immediately, and that can eat up a large chunk of your take-home pay as well, preventing you from ever accumulating any real wealth. And banks are far less forgiving than mom and dad. On top of that, the house payment, if you're an up-and-coming 25-year-old, you're probably 3 years into your first job and 2 years into your first marriage. You likely have a dog and a cat, 2 expensive vehicles sitting in the driveway. Perhaps you have an hour commute to work both ways. Let's say you also have $10,000 of credit card debt. And you both have about $50,000 in student loan debt. And oh yes, you just found out you're pregnant. Now, you'll get to discover the truly frightening cost of daycare. Trust me, I got young kids, I know. With this level of initial debt, you can almost guarantee you'll be calling your spouse an ex in the next few years. You just turned the American dream into the all too common American nightmare. And all this to say, what about having some extra emergency fund dollars to prepare for an inevitable future disaster? Future? Are you kidding? You're living a disaster right now. You're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. You're borrowing a little money each month to pay off the last few bills that always seem just to fall short of. You're tapped out on all your lines of credit. You're in debt up to your ears, and you can't get your head above water even in the best of times, much less in a world full of emergencies and surprises. The only consolation I can give you is this: you're not alone. Many, if not most Americans live this way. Okay, but is there a silver lining? Let's look at the bright side for a moment. If you live in America, at least you have the option of running up an enormous debt to live a lifestyle that's way beyond what most people on planet Earth could imagine. In most corners of the world, living a lifestyle beyond your means isn't even an option. In third world countries, people struggle to survive without access to debt to buy them extra time. Of course, you're struggling too, just in a different way. And in the end, it all catches up with you eventually. There are no free lunches. Make no mistake, Americans love the trappings of wealth and success. They love the idea of these trappings more than they love actual success. I once asked a group of high school students if they'd like to be successful or wealthy due to some great thing they did, like curing cancer or inventing a new supercomputer or developing some exotic power source, or just wealthy. If I could guarantee them success in their endeavors, would they rather have earned that wealth or had it just give it to them? They all chose to have wealth just given to them. Now I asked them why, and one kid was sincere. She said, if I had invented something or started a company or something, then she'd have to worry about that and about keeping it successful and about paying her employees or to make it better or inventing the next big thing. If she were just rich with no responsibilities, she wouldn't have to worry about any of that. She just wanted the wealth. She wanted the trappings of success without success or hard work that comes with it. And many Americans want this, not understanding that this virtually assures a surefire journey down the pathway of despair. Wealth with no goals and no purpose is not serving anyone other than yourself. So now I ask, what would be the point of life? Still, many of us want this, and we incur debt to get it. And make no mistake, debt is available to be had. For example, I don't think I've ever checked out from Home Depot or walked through an airport without somebody asking me if I wanted a discount to sign up for a credit card. Credit is pushed on us over and over again, at least until you begin to renege on your debts. Society, politicians, and credit card companies want you to borrow and spend. The more, the better for the economy, right? They encourage it and then bash you over the head when you fall behind and can't make payments. It's like giving free liquor to somebody and telling them to relax, drink up, have fun until they do so excessively and develop alcoholism. Then they're scorned by society and looked down upon as weak. Does this mean that all credit is bad? No more good or evil than bourbon. For some, it's something they can use now and then to no ill effect. For others, it's what they use daily and it destroys them. Well, in a worst case scenario, someone's at the end of their rope and it's killing them. Here's what's crazy about our modern society's credit system. We've created something called a credit score that scores you how good or bad you are at borrowing and paying off debt. But I prefer to call it the I love debt score. Whenever personal finances come up in conversations, the idea of having a good credit score is mentioned. But a good credit score is not a measure of financial success. It's only a measure of how reliable you are at paying other people back. That's it. My personal goal is to someday have a credit score of 0. Yes, 0. Because if you don't need to use debt, then your credit score will eventually drop to 0. And thus, ironically, having a 0 credit score can be an indicator of real wealth. And anyone who doesn't need to use debt anymore is wealthy. If your house is paid for, and your car is paid for, and you have a ton of money in the bank, you can live a happy, resilient life without having a good FICO slave score. Now, with that said, my wife and I, we use credit cards for almost everything. Though sometimes we go through cash-only periods to keep us disciplined. The trick is, using a credit card successfully is to understand it's merely a convenience, a way to get your money quickly, even a few days before payday. The trick here is that we're all talking about getting your money, not somebody else's money. If you pay off that credit card every single month, never carrying a balance, then the credit cards will remain a convenience and not a source of debt. Most people can't be that disciplined. And that small balance left over at the end of the first month becomes larger at the end of the second month. And by the third month, carrying that debt becomes not only a habit, but a necessity to maintain your lifestyle. And then the credit card becomes a very costly convenience indeed. So for ultimate control, I mentioned cash-only periods. There are times when my wife and I will go to the bank right after payday and withdraw a few $100s, or the max allowed at the ATM. Then we split it between us, and we use that cash for everything we purchase until it's gone. It's not that the cash is all we have, it's just that having a limit on the amount in the wallet makes us more discerning about our spending. The bottom line is it keeps the credit card balance a little bit smaller, and we've mostly paid as we went, and the exercise makes us more careful about our spending. Now, at this point, I'm going to guess what you're thinking. My mortgage will take 30 years to pay off. That's a long-term debt. Am I just not supposed to buy a house at all? Of course, you can buy a house if you can afford it, and as long as it doesn't make you house poor. And you should never plan on making payments for 30 years. Only 2 types of people make payments for 30 years. 1, those who bought way too much house to begin with. Or 2, those who wish to boost the mortgage industry by paying a whole lot of unnecessary interest over the life of the loan. Not many people fall into that latter category, but many fall into the former. Here's a simple rule of thumb. If you and your partner are working full time, you should be able to make double house payments or very close to this. If you can't, then you probably own too much house. Yes, you can take the 30-year loan. Just make sure you can always make the payment should one of you lose your job. And when both of you have a job, you can make payments as though it's financed for 15 years. That way you'll pay it off sooner and you'll pay a ton less interest to the banks. Debt is not just something to be avoided, it needs to be retired as well. So what is too much debt? How do you define it? I'm sure some famous investment counselors or bankers or economic experts have actual values, percentages of income, assets versus debt ratios, and so on to define excessive debt. I don't subscribe to any of that. I'm a simple person. Am I carrying too much debt? All you have to do is ask yourself a few simple questions. How long will it take me, the way I'm currently living, to break even? Is money the last thing you think about each night before falling asleep? Or the first thing you think about when you wake up each morning? Do you get sick feeling in the pit of your stomach when you find the bill in the mailbox? Are your relationships suffering because of money? Do you dread discussing or even thinking about helping pay for kids' colleges? Do you have a feeling of helplessness when you think about potential disasters and don't have the resources to prepare for them? If you come up short on any of these simple questions, then you probably need help. You notice these questions are not really about money. They're about emotional well-being, the impacts of debt on your life. The most significant benefit to retiring debt is not having more to spend or being able to pay cash for things. It's not even about avoiding writing checks to credit card companies each month. It's 100% about how you feel. Financial freedom is essential for happiness. Freedom is not going through life with a massive financial burden hanging over your head. It's all about losing that shackle around your ankle. Because make no mistake, debt is slavery. Slavery you've sold yourself into. A large part of your life belongs to someone else when you're in debt. A portion of every paycheck, even workday, every hour goes to someone else. It's bad enough we must work almost a third of our lives to pay our government taxes. When we spend another third to appease a bank or creditor somewhere, we're robbing ourselves and keeping ourselves down. Rid yourself of debt is all about feeling good about yourself, feeling resilient, feeling like a success rather than just looking like one. You'll have a far happier life if you can make it a debt-free one. And isn't a happy life worth it? If you're ready to change the way you live and make being resilient financially and physically and emotionally a big part of your life, then you gotta check out a program I call The Resilient Life. It's a program I built from the ground up that helps give you challenges and goals and inspire you. And it's a community of people that help you achieve more resiliency in your life. Sounds like something you'd be interested in? Make sure you check the link in the description below. Until next time, prepare, adapt, and overcome.